Hello everyone, this is AbisMal, and today we're doing another two-deck comparison, this time between two Captain Marvel decks, both in the Justice aspect. We have Solo Marvel Champion with Float Like a Butterfly, and then AbisMal, that's myself again, with the Nuclear option. So just like last time, both decks faced Claw as kind of the appetizer to get warmed up. And then we dug into the main course with Magneto. So one game in Standard, one game in Expert versus Claw, one game in Standard, and 3 games in Expert versus Magneto. And then actually I decided to try an extra bonus games with Float Like a Fighter Pilot. And so I'll talk about that once we get to the results here, because that was a fun extra game that I thought this deck was even more designed to play against. Both decks will be linked in the description, so you'll be able to find them there. And once again, like before, I play my deck first to make sure I'm thoroughly used to the villains and counter cards, and then also Captain Marvel's identity specific cards. Then that way, when I switch over to, in this case, Float Like a Fighter Pilot, I can just focus on the differences between the aspect cards, in this case, the Justice cards and the basic cards, so that I don't have as much to worry about and can try to lean into the strengths more of that particular deck. And a quick reminder before I move on with this, I'm happy to create a deck discussion for anyone's deck. I can playtest your deck and then do a video on it, or I can create a deck for someone if you request it, playtest that deck, and then do a video on that. Just let me know in the comments what you'd like, and I'm happy to go ahead and do that. And then also some disclaimers here. So first of all, Solo Marvel Champion and I chatted ahead of time, and they graciously gave me the okay to use their deck for this two-deck comparison video. And this is really meant to be a celebration of different ways people might build decks that might inspire others in their own deck builds, or show some examples of some decks that they might want to try. I do want to point out something special with regard to Float Like a Fighter Pilot. So looking at Solo Marvel Champions deck here, let's go to full screen. So one of the things I wanted to point out is that if there's anybody here who has some core set only, so you're a new player, then Solo Marvel Champion has built some decks with Captain Marvel, a Justice deck and a Leadership deck that's just with the core set. So if you check out this deck and then go to his decks here, you can see those. So that's a great resource there. Also, this deck, he has videos where he tested this against Expert Ebony Maw and Expert Vampire. And I wanted to mention specifically the Expert Ebony Maw video. So in that, he locks down Ebony Maw with this deck, and you'll see why when we start getting into the decks. And Ebony Maw does not cast or get off not even one spell in that playthrough. So it's a fun playthrough to watch. In addition, Solo Marvel Champion has some real creative videos that are different than others. I'll go ahead and show you an example real fast. So he has this video where you can create a custom module in Marvel Champions to take any ally that's an aspect ally and turn them into a hero. So it has whole instructions for that, including links and everything for the rules for creating that. It's pretty cool. I actually have one of my videos where I go through a deck that I created using this. I actually did a Daredevil deck, but then he created a deck with, what's that blue? With Beast. So he did one with Beast and did a playthrough with it. So you can go check all that out. So very cool, very different. So something that some of you might be interested in. I'll try to remember to link all these things. We'll see if I do, but I'll try to remember to link all these things in the description. So back to what we're here for. So let's go ahead and do the deck comparison. So first, the similarities of the decks. And because there are similarities, I actually think it'll be nicer if I focus on just one deck, since these are elements that they have in common. So actually, let me just zoom into the Float Like a Butterfly deck to point out those similarities. So the first thing is that both decks include a significant amount of confusion. There's a reason for that if you're going to play a Justice deck, and that is if we look at Captain Marvel's abilities, not the hero ability, but actually the alter ego ability. It has this commander ability, action, choose a player to draw one card. So you want to go into the alter ego side as frequently as you can, at least if you want to take advantage of that. So not only do you get the 6-card hand size to begin with, which is already an extra card, but then you get to just draw a card and get that 7th card. I'm talking about solo here. Both, all of my plays are in solo, but of course, you have benefits there in multiplayer as well. So there's a good reason to include those cards. So we both included Dazzler, right? So Dazzler, forecast ally. After Dazzler enters play, has this response, confuse an enemy. Similarly, we have Professor X. So forced response, after Professor X enters play, choose one, and this is the one that we would typically choose, confuse the villain. And in addition, we also both included Sonic Rifle. Okay. And then there's also Float Like a Butterfly that I'm going to mention right now. This is called Float Like a Fighter Pilot, right? Captain Marvel is an actual soldier, right? And in the comics, a fighter pilot. And so Float Like a Butterfly is included in both of our decks to take advantage of the confusion. So there's another similarity. In addition to that, we have both included the player side scheme build support, which allows us to when this support is defeated, when this player side scheme is defeated, each player may search their deck and discard pile for a support with a cost of 3 or less and put it into play. So we both did that with the focus on Quinn Carrier, which means we both have Quinn Carrier in our deck. So that's another similarity. And then we also both have here the usual energy, genius, and strength resources. But I wanted to mention, this is an important thing. Not everybody would necessarily also include the Power of Justice. So we both have 2 copies of the Power of Justice. And the reason some people might not include that, and why it's important to mention this similarity, is because Captain Marvel has energy absorption, so already has these 2 extra resource cards that are triple resources in their deck. So that is an important similarity to also refer to here. And that's it for the similarities. So the main thing being, we do both lean into confusion, though definitely not to the same degree. And then we have a few other similar things with regard to resources and some basic things. So that's it. Let's get into the differences now. All right, and we're already here in Float Like a Fighter Pilot. So let's start with what's unique about this deck. Since I already alluded to this difference, let's start here. So there are, first of all, 3 copies of Float Like a Butterfly, and you might wonder why the redundancy here. So we'll get into that in just a little bit, because you'll also notice there's this chance encounter that also there are 3 copies of. Again, might seem pretty redundant, but let's go ahead and first look at what Float Like a Butterfly does. So first of all, play under any player's control, max 1 per player. When a character you control attacks a confused enemy, increase the amount of damage that attack deals to that enemy by 1. So obviously this deck is meant to make sure that Float Like a Butterfly gets out. And even if you choose to ignore Float Like a Butterfly in the beginning and not play it, you get plenty of opportunities to then play it, not too long after that. So why the extra copies? Well, first of all, notice it has an energy resource to it. So once you have 1 copy out, the other copies do not go to waste, because one of Captain Marvel's most important upgrades is the energy channel. And the energy channel has an action, spend X energy resources. You can put X energy counters here. So this is a famous card for Captain Marvel for attacking. And you can have a hero action, this attack, discard energy channel, deal 2 damage to an enemy to a maximum of 10 for each energy counter here. So when you get these extra copies of Float Like a Butterfly, either they're going to be used as a resource to play something else, or because they are, in fact, they have the energy resource icon, you can use them to fuel your energy channel. And the same goes for Chance Encounter. So let's read a Chance Encounter. So you can attach this to a side scheme, max 1 per scheme. And it has an interrupt. When the attached side scheme is defeated, search your deck and discard pile for an ally and add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. So you get plenty of opportunities to get more allies to your hand if there are side schemes out that you can defeat. But if there aren't, once again, these extra chance encounters have the energy icon, so you can also use those to help fuel your energy channel. So that big difference, though, if you're going to lean into that, then you'd better also make sure to get the villain confused. And so I mentioned already that both decks have Dazzler and Professor X and Sonic Rifle. The first difference between the decks is that float like a fighter pilot. So the deck for Solo Marvel Champion here has 2 copies of Sonic Rifle. So that already makes sure that you're going to have a lot more opportunities to confuse the villain. Just in case anybody's not familiar with that, this actually has 2 charge counters on it. It costs 3, it's an upgrade. And you exhaust, it's a hero action, exhaust Sonic Rifle and remove 1 charge counter from it. You can confuse an enemy. If the enemy's already confused, you can deal 3 damage to that enemy instead. I did actually find that I use that sometimes, even because this deck has so much confusion available, and you'll see there's some more opportunities for that in a little bit. I did actually use this to help defeat some of the allies. But in addition, it might be used in a push at the end to defeat the villain. But here are the extra opportunities for confusion, although this isn't the real purpose for it. We also have Upside the Head, 3 copies of this. My deck does not include these, so the AbisMal deck. So Upside the Head, hero response, after your hero makes a basic attack and damages an enemy, confuse that enemy. If that enemy is already confused, stun it instead. The second part is really the important part here, though there are times here and there when you might use this to confuse the villain, because once it's confused, you have the opportunity to use the next Upside the Head to then stun it. And this deck includes 2 cards that give the ability to continue to bring Upside the Head back into it. So when you are in alter ego form and you're hoping when you're playing this deck to get into alter ego form fairly regularly, you also have Vigilante Training. So Vigilante Training is a 1-cost support, and you have max of 2 of these per deck, and it has 2 use counters on it, or 2 training counters, so 2 uses. And the alter ego action, exhaust this card and remove 1 training counter from it. Choose a Justice card, one of your yellow event cards in your discard pile, and shuffle it into your deck. So Upside the Head, these 3 copies of Upside the Head, though that is something it's meant to be the priority choice. You could, there are 2 copies of For Justice. That's another difference in this deck. My deck does not have For Justice in it. You can remove, which is a 2-cost event, hero action. You can thwart, remove 3 threat from a scheme, or if you used a tech resource to pay for it, 4 threat from a scheme instead. And sometimes you don't need the 4, sometimes just the 3 is enough. But when you do need the 4, Quinn Carrier is the card that's meant to help make sure that can happen, because the Quinn Carrier is the 3-cost support. You have to play it on your Avenger side only, by the way. So on the hero side, because Captain Marvel is only an Avenger on the hero side, as I think might be true for every Avenger. And the resource here is exhaust Quinn Carrier, generate a wild resource. So that can help with For Justice in particular to get a wild resource. But in addition to that, Quinn Carrier is important because it can also provide those important for energy channel, those what are they called? Energy resources for energy channel, but also Captain Marvel's own, where is it? Photonic Blast. So that's her attack, right? A 3-cost event, and you deal 5 damage to an enemy. And if you pay this card utilizing an energy resource, you draw 1 card. And of course, this deck actually has a ton of energy resources to begin with, but just in case, Quinn Carrier can also provide that. So that's really the main difference, that like the big emphasis for this deck. This deck is meant to confuse the villain, not necessarily because of the confuse lock, but to confuse the villain and also knock it upside the head and stun it and incapacitate it. But just as importantly, it's meant to deal lots of damage to it from the ally attacks, add additional, because if you have it stunned and you have float like a butterfly, and you have tons of opportunities to get float like a butterfly out. And by the way, the power of justice helps to get float like a butterfly out and these allies here. Then you can deal lots of extra damage with those allies. What helps with that, by the way, so you have some additional allies here that are meant to take advantage of float like a butterfly and the confusion. So let's go to Cypher first. This is not the most important one, but it has a nice little benefit. But he has a nice little benefit here, and that, so notice he just has one attack and one thwart. He's a 2-cost ally, which is solid, and to begin with. But his response after Cypher attacks and damages a confused enemy, draw a card. So Cypher's meant to get into there, do an attack, draw a card for you. So to lean into that card draw a little bit for Captain Marvel. And then, but the bigger one when you're pushing for your attack is it's really nice if you have Chamber out. So Chamber is a 4-cost ally, so pretty expensive, but we have a fair number of resources in this deck. 2 thwart, 2 attack, has 3 hit points, but a lot of times that doesn't matter too much unless you happen to thwart with him, because Chamber has this ability right here. Chamber takes -1 consequential damage after he attacks a confused enemy. So he normally takes 1 consequential damage for his attack and for his thwart. But if it's a confused enemy, he doesn't take consequential damage. In addition, if you have float like a butterfly, now he's attacking for 3 every turn, and he can keep attacking again and again and again. And that's really fun when you get that to happen. And on top of that, Captain Marvel's own attacks, once you have float like a butterfly out and confusion out, she normally has 2 attack and 2 thwart. So now she's attacking for 2. And then it ends up juicing up the power of Photonic Blast. Now it's no longer doing 5 damage, it's doing 6 damage, which still isn't a whole lot of damage, but you're also drawing a card after you play Photonic Justice, at least Photonic Blast, at least typically. And then it also gives that little boost to Energy Channel. So Energy Channel now can deal, instead of up to 10 damage, can deal up to 11 damage. In addition, I found there were times when I had to use Energy Channel to get rid of some minions. And it's really nice. Like I said, this has so much confusion in it. There are times when I confuse the minions, and if you have just 2 energy, what are they called again? Energy counters on it. Well, that's 4 damage. Well, if you have that minion confused, then those 2 counters deal 5 damage. Now, admittedly, you lose your Energy Channel, but you're going to be going through your deck and getting Energy Channel back, although not too much. So in this deck, you do want to save those more frequently. Then once you see in my deck, you don't necessarily have to save those as much. But in this deck, you do want to preserve those most of the time, but in an emergency, it'll do what you need it to do. So there it is. So this deck can be very fun, and when we see the results, actually, I think I want to get into the results for this deck right away. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So first, Float Like a Fighter Pilot faced against Claw, both in Standard and Expert, defeating in both, and I got a chance to begin to see the power of this deck, very often confusing the enemy, sometimes stunning it as well, not letting Claw have a whole lot of actions. And then once you get your primary card, Float Like a Butterfly out here, again, you have 3 copies of it, so you get 1 of them out here, you're dealing extra damage. So this deck did a very nice job of handling Claw. Then we move on to Magneto. So Magneto, at the beginning of the game, has Stalwart. So that's a problem, partly because if you do actually watch Solo Marvel Champion's video here when he plays against Expert Ebony Maw, he, at the end of the video, I think it was, he mentions that this deck isn't really meant to go against Stalwart villains. It's not really equipped for it. And, it doesn't have, a lot of times you would want to have a lot more allies for that type of a thing to be able to stop them. It's not really built for that. So I was actually kind of curious about how this deck would do, and I was impressed with how it did. It's not like it was this massive, success against Magneto. However, it beat Magneto once in Standard. So as a reminder, I played Magneto once in Standard and then 3 times in Expert. It beat Magneto once in Standard, and in the 3 games in Expert, it also beat Magneto once in Expert. So Magneto, in the other 2 games, Magneto was just his often overwhelming self that he can be. And if you don't have lots of allies to handle that, and and plus he can reactivate again and again, and those activations might happen when he's scheming or when he's attacking. And so, when he does his thing, it can be very difficult to stop. And that was the case here. But like I said, there was a defeat in Standard and a defeat in Expert, and both of those defeats were pretty similar. Magneto was able to make a fair amount of progress, but Captain Marvel was able to get rid of. So if you progress quickly enough on the side schemes against Magneto, you can put a certain card on him. Let me find that card. So after you defeat Orbital Decay, and you have to defeat like 2 other side schemes before this, but after you defeat Orbital Decay, you flip this card and it makes Physical Strain, attach it to Magneto, and he loses Steady. So now he's no longer a Steady villain. And he has a way to kind of counteract that afterwards too, which is also frustrating. However, once he gets to this point, you have a real opportunity to start doing what you want to do with regard to confusion and stunning. And in the 2 victories, that is in fact what happened. And so I got to see a little bit of that when I was playing Magneto. And so that's why I wanted to try this deck one more time. So first of all, like I said, I was already impressed that it handled what it did, because it wasn't meant to handle a deck like this. But so what I decided to do was go up against Project Wide Awake. So Project Wide Awake is kind of a cool one for this deck to face. So let's get back to, let's introduce a couple of Project Wide Awake cards real quickly. So when you're facing Project Wide Awake, the villain you're facing is Sentinel. And so the main scheme is this Knight of the Sentinels. Operation Zero Tolerance, it gains permanent, right? So you have Operation Zero Tolerance in the game. And it has this forced response. After an enemy attacks and defeats an ally, place that ally face down under this scheme. So what that means is you don't want to allow your allies to be defeated. So you want to avoid that. And so I thought this would be a cool deck to, if we can get them confused and stunned, then you could really see the strength of this deck and take advantage of it and not have to worry about this Operation Zero Tolerance causing you to lose the game. Because if you end up with, in a solo game, if you end up with 4 cards under here, you automatically lose the game. And that was exactly what I found. So the deck really shined against the Sentinels, which was Project Wide Awake. And it had a chance to really lean into all of those strengths. So let's bring that deck up again one more time. All right, so then Float Like a Fighter Pilot, did all those things that I described earlier that it could do, adding to the attack damage and finishing off Sentinel. So that was a very fun, so if you're looking for that type of deck and trying to experiment with it, this is a really fun deck to go ahead and try to go against those non-stalwart type villains and have a lot of fun doing it, locking them up with some confusion, with some stunning, doing some damage. And like I said before, it's actually not really meant to be a confused lock deck, but it kind of works out to be that way. It's meant instead to take advantage of the confusion to be able to get a lot more damage output out of Captain Marvel's deck. All right, so that's Float Like a Fighter Pilot by Solo Marvel Champion. So now let's get into the other deck. So you had a chance to see one style. Let's get into this other one. All right, so let's look and see how the nuclear option is different from the other deck. So first of all, notice this is loaded with allies. The other one had, I think, 6 allies in it. Let me double. Yes, that was 6 allies in Float Like a Fighter Pilot, compared to the 9 allies in the AbisMal deck, my deck. So now this deck is designed to take on somebody like, well, a variety, actually. This deck is built to take on a variety of villains. So that would include somebody like Magneto. And I was actually extremely happy with its performance here. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you as well. So first of all, notice we have in here some things that change this deck. So I already mentioned the similarities, right? We have Professor X, we have Dazzler, we have one of these Where'd it go? One sonic rifle. But if we look here, we have some three clear the area. So we're leaning into some more of the card draw in this deck. And in addition to that, we're getting some extra damage output from Waylay. So clear the area. Oh, I should probably look at that first, right? Clear the area, 1 cost event. Remove 2 threat from a scheme. If this removes the last threat from the scheme, draw 1 card. And this happens really easily when you have so many Justice allies out in the deck, or out on possibility out in play. They can thwart off some of this. So can Captain Marvel with her 2 thwart to set up clear the area to finish off the rest of the thwart and therefore draw a card. And then, so when that happens, that gives us an opportunity to trigger Waylay's bigger damage. So Waylay is a 3-cost attack. And normally, after your hero thwarts, you can deal 4 damage to an enemy. However, if you do 7 damage instead, you can do 7 damage instead if that thwart removed the last threat from a scheme. So that's a really nice boost. This card then deals more damage than her Photonic Blast cards do. And so now she actually has quite a few attacks. She has 3 Photonic Blasts, 2 Waylays, and the 2 energy channels, which can deal up to 10 or possibly 11 damage when you have Float Like a Butterfly in play. So notice my deck does only have 1 Float Like a Butterfly in play. It is not meant to be a card that comes out early in the game. It's meant to come out late in the game when you're doing your push of damage. And in the meanwhile, Photonic Blast and Waylay do the damage. And actually, I ended up using in this deck a lot more often Energy Channel to get rid of some minions here and there. So I wasn't looking to do the big damage at first. So sometimes I used Energy Channel to get rid of those villains. I'm drawing a lot of cards. I go through my deck pretty often. In addition, there's 1 extra card that is able to retrieve Energy Channel, and that is the ally Hope Summers. So that's another difference in this deck too. So we have Hope Summers in here, a 4-cost ally, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 3 life. But here's the important part. Response: after you play Hope Summers from your hand, search your deck for a superpower card and add it to your hand. So now she costs 4. So, certainly the card draw can mean you can have a decent number of resources. And we do have a decent number of resources. We have Alpha Flight Station. I didn't mention this in the other deck, but Alpha Flight Station is a card that allows you to do some more card draw. So when you are, has an action, exhaust Alpha Flight Station, choose and discard 1 card from your hand, draw 1 card. Draw 2 cards instead if you are Carol Danvers. In other words, if you are in alter ego form, you draw 2 cards instead, and that's most of the time that's what you want to do. So in this deck, as well as in the other deck, we have plenty of confusion in this deck, so we still do get to go down to alter ego side regularly and take advantage of this Alpha Flight Station. So we end up with quite a bit of card draw in this deck. So that already gives you additional resources. But in addition, like I said before, both decks have Quinn Carrier, but this deck also includes Helicarrier. So we have a couple of targets for this build support, both Quinn Carrier and Helicarrier. If those happen to both be out, you would go for Alpha Flight Station, but that's not too terribly likely. So going back to Hope Summers. So like I said, Hope Summers, after you play, search your deck for a superpower card and add it to your hand. So you have some different options there. Here are the important ones. First, there's Energy Channel. That is a superpower card, and it costs 0 to play. So when you put it in your hand, you can immediately then put it out and start getting that thing ready to get charged up with your energy resources. And there's still plenty of energy resources in this deck, including Quinn Carrier itself. And of course, you have your energy absorption cards, the Power of Justice. So we have a number of ways to charge this up. In addition, suppose you already have it out there. Well, you could choose instead to grab Cosmic Flight. Cosmic Flight isn't a card that I play too often, though I might play it. But more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, but just as importantly, it has an energy resource. So if I already have an energy channel out, Hope Summers goes and grabs a Cosmic Flight, which has an energy resource, and it leads to additional charging up of the energy channel. And then you could also grab Photonic Blast, excuse me. That's not something I would normally draw, but that is another one you could draw. But the main ones to draw really were to get that extra energy channel out when we needed it, or not an extra one. You can only play one at a time, by the way, right? You can have max one per player. So to get one of those if I didn't have any out, or to start charging it up with Cosmic Flight. So Hope Summers was a surprise in this deck. I did not play Hope Summers every time I came to her. She wasn't always the best option, but she was often a great option. We also had additional card draw from Nick Fury, who can famously draw 3 cards when played. In addition to that, these allies were meant to control the board. So not only does Captain Marvel have decent, attack and thwart, 2 and 2 of each, but these allies, like Agent Coulson has 2 thwart, and this added response. After Agent Coulson enters play, search your deck and discard pile for a preparation card and add it to your hand. I'm going to get into that in just a little bit, but I just wanted to point out Dazzler has 2 thwart, Hope Summers had 2 thwart, Jessica Jones only has 1 thwart. However, Jessica Jones gets +1 thwart for each side scheme in play. So sometimes that was very effective. We also had Professor X, who has 3 thwart. And then we also had Quasar's ability, which was after Quasar enters play, remove 1 threat from each scheme in play. So these allies did a fantastic job of getting rid of those side schemes that were building up, or the main schemes threat, but also they helped to take out those minions. In addition to, when you're getting all that card draw, you're getting these Photonic Blasts. And the Waylays help out with minions too, though most of the time when I played Waylay, I usually did those 7 points of damage up against the villain, but there are times when the minions were pretty big, and it helped to get rid of a minion. So having that number of cards available to do damage, the Photonic Blast, which would also draw you a card, the Waylay, the 2 copies of Waylay, and then the 2 energy channels, this deck was really cool. And here's what completed the coolness of the deck, the control of the deck. And that is, I already mentioned we have Agent Coulson here, who after Agent Coulson enters play, you can grab a preparation card. Here's the preparation card, Counterintelligence. And because we had plenty of resources, I got to play Counterintelligence regularly. And I find very often when I include Agent Coulson and Counterintelligence in my decks, I often don't get to play Counterintelligence because I don't have the extra resources to do so. But this, because of the card draw and the resource generators that we had, this interrupt, you're able to play this preparation. You put it out there, it's a 2-cost upgrade, and it has an interrupt. When any amount of threat would be placed on the main scheme, discard Counterintelligence and prevent 3 of that threat. So I found myself using that regularly in the games. In addition, we have Under Surveillance, which is a 2-cost upgrade, and as in it's just included in the deck, and you attach it to the main scheme, increase the target threat value of that attached scheme by 4. So I very often would have this out in play and Counterintelligence out in play. I would have the villain confused. I could, anytime I wanted, go to Alter Ego side and not worry about if the villain did actually scheme, because the villain would not typically have a chance to defeat that main scheme. A couple of additionals here too. We have Skilled Investigator, so that helped some more with the card draw. So play under any player's control, max 1 per player. After a side scheme is defeated, exhaust Skilled Investigator, draw 1 card. And then did we have anything else in here? Oh, and we also had Heroic Intuition, which actually was a major card in this deck. Play under any player's control, max 1 per player. Right, Heroic Intuition, it costs 2. Your hero gets +1 thwart. So this was really critical, another critical part of using Clear the Area, or sometimes when I didn't have Clear the Area in play, and I wanted to be able to trigger having Waylay, being able to play Waylay, so after hero thwarts, well, that brings Captain Marvel up to 3 thwart, and very often 3 thwart, and especially when combined with some other ally doing some thwart, but a lot of times not. A lot of times just that 3 thwart was enough to defeat some side scheme or take the last threat off the main scheme and allow Waylay to be triggered and to be able to deal its 7 damage. So what were the results? So I already mentioned this deck I was planning on this being good, but this deck turned out to be, for me, actually the most fun Captain Marvel deck I had played up to this point. And just so you know, I pretty much only play my own decks except for when I do these deck comparisons. And since I became a creator, before that, I only played my own deck. So this was pretty much the most fun deck I'd had with Captain Marvel. And here are the results. So first of all, went up against Claw, right? Standard and Expert, had no trouble there, dominated him, kept him in the first stage, and then went up against Magneto. And this deck was really impressive against Magneto. Magneto did not get out of the first stage, right? He has 3 stages in his schemes. He didn't get out of the first stage when I played him against in Standard, and in the 3 games in Expert, he still never got out of that first stage because I would get under surveillance on it. And then a lot of times the counterintelligence, I would confuse him. And you might wonder, well, how did you confuse him? Well, I would get rid of those side schemes that he had, because all of these cards here, all these allies, plus the Clear the Areas, plus Captain Marvel, got through you have to get basically through 3 side schemes that just have 3 threat on them. And I would basically get through those relatively quickly and then get that card that I mentioned before that makes it so that he no longer has steady, and I would keep it under control. Now, that didn't mean every one of those was an easy match. He would still do the things that Magneto does, and he would present challenges, but because I had under surveillance out there and very often counterintelligence, and I was able to confuse him here and there, or sometimes a lot, then I was able to get rid of the villains. I had allies out there to, when he would do his attacks, I would have allies out there to block. Plus Captain Marvel has her own 12 hit points. So she has, a healthy number of hit points. So she was able to handle that, keep things under control, and really never be in danger, and kept Magneto in stage 1 every single one of those games. So that was a lot of fun. There were a couple of games where it was a lot of damage output and I defeated him quickly, but some of them were still those, you can have those kind of Magneto games where they're real endurance matches because he's bringing out, minion after minion, but this deck just handled it. And especially at the, when we bring out Float Like a Butterfly, all the attacks from the allies and all the other attacks would do an extra point of damage. And it was just really fun to blast him with a lot of damage once we got everything set up. Okay, so in any case, both decks were fun decks serving 2 different purposes. So if you're looking for a deck that's meant to be kind of an all-purpose deck, that is a real control deck, yet can still deal out quite a bit of damage, then this deck here, so what is it? The nuclear option, you can read why it is that I came up with that title for this. So that's my AbisMal deck, but also we have the other deck, Float Like a Fighter Pilot from Solo Marvel Champion. And again, please check out the other things that he has here too. But this was a really fun deck for facing those villains that don't have Stalwart and being able to keep them under control and doing both confusion and stun with the same deck, and then get things set up to continuously do that extra damage because you always have the opportunity to get Float Like a Butterfly out. All right, I hope you enjoyed this 2-deck comparison. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I look forward to the next one. Oh, and please comment too. That's when I have the most fun, actually, is when I get a chance to have conversations with people. This is a deck discussion channel, and that's what I like doing, is discussing decks. Have a great one, everybody.